We all have a level of health and wellness that is the result of our drive, of what is motivating us. We have a reason. Well, what is it? And are we in agreement with it? Just as important as our literal physical health, maybe more, is our peace about ourselves in regards to it. In episode 7 of this What Drives You podcast, which was November 6th, 2020, I talked through where we find fulfillment and why, and just in our lives overall. And the first one I listed was health and wellness, our physical selves primarily. Obviously, our physical selves holds our mental selves and they're intrinsically connected, but our physical selves. And I don't list this first to say it's most important necessarily. But I do somewhat wonder if it's sequentially a priority. I mean, if our bodies are unwell, what I find in myself and others, if our bodies are unwell, we're so less capable of doing or being much good in any other area. Well, in this case, I asked my audience, what reasons drive you to exercise and eat well and increase and or maintain your health and wellness? And I asked this, when I say I ask and do a survey, it's generally on Facebook. You can find me at Agent K Miller. And I do a lot of shows where I post questions, do surveys, and then talk over that. Over 70 comments have come in so far, and I'm going to briefly talk through the issues and share some comments. My point in this episode is to share what drives people to pursue and invest in their health and wellness. If you know me at all, you know I put a high priority and value on health and wellness so much. I have another podcast dedicated to it, the True Life Podcast. And I feel the podcast, that one, True Life, stands out in that we don't just discuss health advocacy and the mechanics of health and wellness, but the psychology and the why and the compassion for the struggle, especially in this unhealthier uh, increasingly unhealthy culture. But I'm going to make the focus here, strive to sharing what real people in everyday life have to say. Now, obviously, the people who responded are those that have been investing in their health and have found a motive. And I feel it's valuable to hear why. Is it all vanity? Is it about being a monk who imbibes in no pleasures of the appetite? Is it, fitness junkies who live on adrenaline and endorphin highs? Well, let's hear. And you know what? I'll start off and share just real quick. As I thought about it for myself, what drives me in health and wellness? And I really think number one is I really like to feel well. And I know what feeling well is like. I have, once you have a taste of something. So I've had a taste of that. And I have so little tolerance for feeling ill and achy and lacking in capacity. I think I have hopefully a healthy fear. Maybe it's some unhealthy too, but man, I just like to feel good. And that can sound all holy and, altruistic, but man, I just do. I don't know how people deal. I have great compassion for those who deal with chronic illness and disease and aches and pains and things. I mean, my wife has been hit broadsided in car wrecks a couple of times and it deals with chronic pain to a certain degree and back and neck. And oh my gosh, I have compassion for that. And I have nothing but privilege for me not having been hit by a car and have something like that. But I think number one really is I not only like to feel well, maybe I have to. I desperately want to be able to do the things that I feel like I need to do, I have to do even, and I want to do. Number two, I think a lot just my self image and personal confidence. When we had our first child, my wife and I did, 1995. I would have been 24 years old, and I was an elite. I was a pro cyclist at that point. Um, and we had a child. He had a lot of medical problems, and I stopped for 2 years. At the end of that 2 years, my wife bought me a bike and said, go train, not just even go ride, but go train, like train for racing. She says, you're just a better person. And I realized I just feel more worthy of life. No, I mean, again, I'm not going to paint a right or wrong or anything. And maybe I'm always open to, especially with health and wellness as an area for me, that sometimes I may even fall into some unhealthy, addictive type nature there and self-image issues that I shouldn't have rely on my fitness or my athleticism or whatnot. So I'm open to. I think we're all, as my co-host on the True Life show, Dr. Randy James, says we're all on the spectrum of these issues. It's not, black and white, all or nothing. And so I'm open to that. But man, I feel better about myself and personal confidence. You're going to hear a lot of people testify to that in just a minute. Number three, vanity. I'm going to put that there. I don't like the word vanity because that's just a negative word, but I don't feel any shame for it. I see most everybody I think is vain, has vanity, and I don't think it's all bad. And we have vanity. We want our car to look nice. And I find that most people drive nicer car. I have most people, almost everyone. I drive old, decrepit trucks. And everybody has a nicer car than I do, and they clean it a lot more than I do, or they have fancier looking homes. Most people also have that. I have a really cool house, but very utilitarian, not very design-y, not high design. They have nicer clothes than I do, fancier clothes. I don't own, actually, I do own an old suit, probably eaten by moths at some point in my closet. But you get the point. Some people landscape, some people, we all do things uh, aesthetically where we want things to look nice. And yet we often will try to downplay the physical aesthetics, which is interesting. So we'll talk more about that in just a moment. And I also, then a big one is my responsibility to family and humanity at large. And I do feel a responsibility to be there to serve my family and to not be a burden later in life, which we're seeing more and more people suffer from right now as their parents are aging and they're having to take care of them. Can't remember the stats right now, but they're incredibly high of people who are taking care of elderly and infirm parents. And what a blessing those people are. And maybe I'll end up there at some point. And I have no guarantee that my kids won't end up taking care of me because of an accident or a disease. I cannot guarantee I will be disease and illness free, but I'm doing everything that I can. Or that's not true. I'm never doing everything I can. I don't believe, but I'm doing a lot to keep that from happening. And I really am working to where at the age of 85, I still want to be able to help my kids move, go on a hike, get down to the floor with my grandkids and whatnot. So there's a little bit on my own drives. You know what? I'm leaving one out. I just flat out enjoy it. So I have done athletic endeavors so much, especially cycling and even running, that I literally have great joy. And I'm just grateful for that. What a privilege. It is flat out play to go mountain bike. So I'm getting this great exercise, but I'm also it just makes me feel good. I think we did a recent show about mastery, and it's an area, mountain biking, running. I don't know if I'm a master runner, but trail running, I can boogie along. And it's a place where I feel in control. I feel free in control. So I think it feeds a lot for me. So I just get a lot of joy out of it. So there's my motives. Now, as we're going to go along, as I go through all the spokes of our big areas of life fulfillment and talk about those, when we come to some like finance, man, I'm going to be at the bottom of the barrel on that one. So this just happens to be a highlight area for me. All right, let's read some. Marvin Pennick. He says, I imagine how I want to feel at 95 years old, and it drives me to aim my behaviors at making that version of myself possible. Man, again, we're on health and wellness. So I'm going to keep bringing up probably the True Life podcast, which of course I'd love you to go hear. I really think it's a great value on health and wellness, and stands out from other health and wellness resources. But in that, we talked recently about the difference of lifespan versus health span. So whether or not you care to live to be 95 years old, or you just want to live to be 65 years old or whatever, at whatever age you want to be, I would bet you would like to be having as much health at the end of that time as possible, as opposed to, yeah, I lived to 95, but I was immobile from 65 or 70 or 75 or 80, and not cognitively aware. And I just lingered, as my co-host, Dr. Randy James, talks about in this. Marvin, I think he's saying that he doesn't want to just live to 95, but be well to 95. So again, it's not the age, I think, that's as important so much as your health span and being well to whatever age you live to be. And I ask, how do you want to feel at 95 and why? Marvin says, I want to be fit then, so I exercise today. I want to be flexible and have balance then, so I stretch and I do yoga today. I came back. This is again another reason that's just fun to connect on Facebook. Find me if you want at Agent K Miller, because it's fun to have these conversations and press in more. So I ask him again, why do you want to be fit? Many expect and acquiesce to being pretty disabled at that point, 95. Marvin says, I'm refusing to either expect or acquiesce. That is my answer to your question, I guess. Having the option to not acquiesce is what drives me to take care of my health. Faye Bryant, she says, it's the desire to be able to participate in the lives of my family. And I asked her, does this come from witnessing someone who was or is not able to participate? Faye says, Kevin, it's from being one who was only on the periphery. At almost 300 pounds, I wasn't able to go some places, to take part in some events. I would be winded and my legs wouldn't support me. Heat and exhaustion put me down in minutes. So that's interesting. She wants to be able, not because she saw somebody disabled, she was disabled. Nate Wilson, he says, I want stable mental health, and his kids are a motivation as well. And I said, mental health, as you know, that's not a common correlation people make. Now, I do know of Nate, he is a personal trainer. And he said, Kevin, it's ironic because most of his clients or people I know who end up maintaining a healthy fitness lifestyle end up doing it for the mental health more than other reasons. Okay, so for those of you who are watching the video, and that's if you're not and want to watch any of the videos, we videotape almost all the podcasts and put them on a YouTube channel that I never talk about. It's got great videos if you enjoy seeing some of the guests or would like to. And you can find it at its YouTube. And I think it's Kevin Miller CO is where you can find that. So for those of you who do watch the video, the bookshelf behind me, which I made that bookshelf, that's aspens right off my property. It's about a mile as a crow flies over the ridge from where I'm standing in my studio right now. Aspens that we cut down, standing dead, milled them. I own a mill and I built that shelf there. Very, very proud of that. It was fun event there. Did that with one of my sons. All the books on there are all the people I've had on shows, some of our greatest leaders and influencers and experts and authors and speakers are on those. Those are their books there. Most of those I did a habits show. So that's another podcast, The Ziglar Show. And I often do, I think twice a month, generally, I'll do a habits show where I talk to my guests and go through their habits. And so many of them, when we talk about the physical aspect, the habits that they maintain physically, exercise and nutritionally with what they eat and how they do, so many of them cite that their primary motive is mental. And that's such a missing link that we have in our culture, that we can think cognitively and sit at our desk and work on a computer and write and interact with our work and get great work done, even if our physical bodies are in disrepair. And we can get good work. Of course, the question is, could we get better work if we were in more health? Or maybe we're getting great stuff out mentally, but if our body is not up to snuff, that mental ability is going to decline soon and we won't be able to get that work out. And that's what we're seeing in our culture with quicker and quicker, sooner and sooner cognitive decline. And that is one, a story there that I've shared maybe in some of my other podcasts, is that in the mid 2000s, when I was mid 2000, it would have been 2009, 10, 11, 12. I was running an organization, online community, helping people pursue self-employment. And in that, we so often found people who had a good idea that fit them. It fit the marketplace. We were able, I'm not saying it's as easy, but we were able to come up with an opportunity. Made sense. It was a good business idea, had great potential, and time would go on and they didn't take the steps to make it happen. And I would come back and go, why? And this common answer of, I just don't have the energy. I don't have it at the end of the day. I don't have it on the weekends. And what it brought me to, though, is realizing that my peers in self-employment, people who were self-employment, generally were able to get more out of themselves, more production, let's call it. Okay. And they put their physical wellness as a high priority to help them have that ability to produce more. And I realized, gosh, I do that as well. I just had not conceived of it. Therefore, we put in this self-employment advocacy membership, if you call it, training, teaching, we put a new group on health and wellness. That's really when I started working closely with Dr. Randy James, one of my dearest friends, business partners, and co-host in my True Life podcast. And we brought him in. And it was just for that, folks, for you to go do this thing on the side, to start this thing as you take care of the regular duties of life. You need to be able to get more out of yourself. This is how you can. And he really started off, literally, I'd have him come to events. I would rent out these camps up here in the mountains. And he would come in there and say, all these things that are keeping you from being at your greater capacity, physically and mentally, these ailments that we think of as the norm in our culture, especially the American culture, do not have to be normal. The headaches, the aches, the pains, the indigestion, the yada, yada. He would go down the line of just kind of your basic, your primary ailments here in America. And he said, those don't have to be normal. And people, I don't know that it blew them away. It just got them to going, wait a minute. Yeah. Why have I accepted this? And it was an incredible draw. It was one of the most active groups in the self-employment group. It's really interesting. Now, self-employment, branding, marketing, ideation, finances, all these things that you think about for self-employment. And two of our most active groups were health and wellness and spiritual. So thanks to Nate for bringing that up. Audra Carpenter says, Kevin, I feel better. Sweating gets rid of toxins and keeps the insides working like they were intended. And it keeps my energy up and my mind sharp. So I have a great analogy on that one. So I have a 1984 Jeep CJ7. My wife's mother bought it brand new off a car lot in Austin, Texas in 1984. It sat for a couple years. At some point, would have been about early 2000. Yeah, maybe like 2000. She stopped driving it, got a different car, and the thing sat for 2 years, 2000 to 2002, 2003 maybe. And I was talking about, gosh, we just moved to the mountains. We only had 3 kids at the time. And I said, man, I need to get something with all-wheel drive. And they said, well, gosh, why don't you just take it? We don't use it anymore. So I drove it up here to the mountains of Colorado. And it has always struggled because it's set for 2 years. And we have a lot of time now, especially as our family has grown. It just sits there. And it's just such an interesting thing. A lot of people know this, but I just want you to think about that. You would think that imagine if she had bought that thing, 1984, perfect condition, just parked it in a garage, right? And you could open the door right now and here is this perfectly, or just perfect car. Well, of course, the reality is, anybody who knows cars, is it wouldn't be perfect. Chances are it wouldn't even start. Or if you did, you wouldn't be able to drive it for long because everything in it had dry rotted. All the hoses and valves and gaskets, they don't do well when they're dormant. Isn't that weird? It's the same with us. The more dormant we are, the more things deteriorate, atrophy. And so when she talks about getting rid of toxins, keeping the insides working, that is really true. So every day that we are more sedentary, things slow down. Our body adjusts to whatever we do. And my son, I was going to mention my son. He's coming up. I'm going to read a testimony from him that I got yesterday on the same thing. Ed Draves, I know how good I feel when I eat right and how much more productive I am with good nutrition. Jamie McClellan, my kids and my future grandkids drive me. I want to be around for them as long as possible. Lord willing, I will be healthy in my later years and not a burden. And I asked him, do you have experience with this opposite, the burden that you're drawing from? He said, yes, luckily it's a positive experience. My grandmother lived to see 87 years old. She did have diabetes, but she managed it extremely well. Seeing her take care of herself and the way she did left a major impact on me. Though he does have another example. I watched my father, who's now in his late 60s, abuse alcohol and beer well into his late 50s, which drives my philosophy of I drink water because he drank beer. it's interesting. We see a lot of people in our culture today. And again, I'm going to pick on America. That's where I am. And that's one where we really have the biggest healthcare crisis, I think, on the planet. And we are seeing people age poorly. And it feels like we have a percentage, I don't know what it is, of the population who is just now taking that as that's just the norm. And we decline quicker. We're less able quicker. We have less capacity quicker. And we have another side then who is motivated by that to go the other direction. I think that's a smaller percentage, unfortunately, but motivated or just in flat out fear is what we're seeing as well. Marianne Schutz, she says, at first it was for my kids after one of them called me fat and I broke into tears, but he was right. And then it also became about what I could achieve and do in this amazing world if I was, as I was, healthier and quite frankly, not judged for my size. 102 pounds down later, and I am excited about life and all that I have to offer. Okay, I have an interesting story on that. I'm going to share it in just a minute because there's another one on weight. Actually, there's multiples on weight, but I'll get there in just a second. Megan Tillery. Most of the people on my dad's side of the family are very obese. One Thanksgiving, I was fixing a plate of food and my aunt came up to me and out of nowhere said, I used to be your size when I was young. I was shocked because my whole life she had always been large. Right then and there, I vowed that I would never let myself go. That one single moment plays over in my mind and it really drives me. So interesting. And Brian Lynchard, he responded and said, Megan, I once saw into the future like this when I looked across the aisle at work at a coworker who's probably 20 years older, and I didn't like where I was headed. Nicole Christine, she says, mainly how it makes me feel to exercise and eat well. I don't feel like my best if I'm not exercising or eating poorly. It's also important for general mental health too, especially if I'm feeling stressed. That goes right back to the fact that it makes me feel better. And there are a lot of people who have never been very active, never been very athletic, or maybe they were as a kid, but it's been so many years and it's hard. They hear that and go yada yada yada, and I see that, I experience that once in a while. I know there's a lot of that out in the culture. And you got to realize that if you haven't tasted what it feels like to feel well, it's hard to relate to. It really is. Hopefully we're inspiring people to have faith that they will actually feel better if they'll invest long enough, but it's going to take a while. Jessica Smith Moyer, she says, my children is number one. And two, avoiding sickness. And I ask her, your children, explain more. She says, Kevin, I want to be around to enjoy and celebrate my children and grandchildren. I want to keep up with them. And somebody, I don't know if it's coming up here, but somebody just, yeah, we had a couple testimonials about that, about just real, oh no, it was from a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago. One of the guys that I meet with every Friday, I meet with a group of guys and kind of do life together. And he said that he has, he's been hearing me with all this health and wellness stuff for so many years. He said nothing impacted him as much as being with his family recently and seeing his mother, who has just gotten less and less able. And she said, so here they are as a family. They're doing these activities, participating in all these events together, and she was not able to. And that right there moved him, influenced him more than anything else he's heard to that point. And he is now making some new choices. Scott Womack, at age 54, I just climbed a 9,000-foot mountain this week in Wyoming. I could not have done it a year ago. One of the people I attended the conference with said, hey, I'd like to see you do it again at 61. And I thought, I'm going to do it when I'm 75. Good on you, Scott. I live out here in the mountains of Colorado, but Colorado is one of the healthier, fitter states. It just is. People come here to do outdoors activities. And gosh, we've got about 15 miles from me, we've got the Olympic Training Center as we have the Olympics going on. One of my sons said, gosh, why is it so many of the Olympians that we're watching are from Colorado Springs? I said, buddy, the Olympic Training Center is right there. He's only 11, didn't realize that. But it's really neat as I go to athletic events, to see people well advanced in years who are scampering up mountains and having fun. It's very convincing. Tom Zielinski, he says, I don't like me very much. That's my first step in making the necessary changes. And I asked him, I says, you mean you don't like the image you see in the mirror? He says, yeah. I also don't like the way I think or the way that I behave. And, I wrote back to Tom. I've walked with him a little bit. And I said, man, I want you to know that I struggle with feeling negative thoughts about myself. And I asked him, I said, take some comfort in that it's every person's struggle to a degree. And I'm still surprised sometimes that when pointing back to my bookshelf here full of, successful people who have achieved some great successes, some really fulfilling successes, things that are helping other people, but they still often struggle with this. Again, on a spectrum, not as much. They're not over here depressed and despaired and massively suffering, but it still exists. I think we often feel like we are the worst, we are the weakest, we are the most disgusting to ourselves, and to know that, man, this is the plight of humanity to some degree. You are not alone in that, and don't feel like that. I think we often feel like our problem is the biggest problem. We have it worse than other people. We are more shameful than other people are. And man, I find that is seldom the truth. So know that you're not alone in that. And I don't know we'll ever eradicate that. Am I ever going to get to the point where I look in the mirror and I absolutely adore myself? Sounds kind of narcissistic, but you get the point. And I think we always struggle with self-doubt. And to some degree, I think that's healthy. Without it, I think we would be psychopathic. Brian, he says, a few years ago, I reached 260 pounds and still climbing. I started exercising. Now it's a habit. Much of my exercise is fun and social, such as pickleball, hiking, fishing, the gym. And I asked him, I said, so what's the reason that being 260 plus pounds was not okay? He says, Kevin, it was about the same time I had a son and I wanted to be able to play with him. There's so often where we do have some catalyst. And I wish it came sooner for us, and it'd probably serve us better. But it's the person who has the child and starts thinking about their own mortality and wellness, or how many heart attacks do we have happen, and people are told, man, if you don't change your lifestyle, you're not going to survive the next one. And that's part of probably, I hope it's my healthy fear, is if I am not daily pursuing my health and wellness, then I am daily allowing a propensity for something to be growing negatively that's going to manifest at some point, and that thing is going to happen. And again, I'm going to say, I cannot guarantee that with all this health and wellness, what if I have cancer or get cancer tomorrow? And if I did, somebody would say, look, man, see that guy, Kevin, he's always spouting off about all his health and wellness. He's still got cancer. And I'm going to tell you two things that I really believe, I have faith in, is one, I think if I got it, chances are I would have gotten it quite a while ago. I would have gotten it 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and I helped stave it off. And I'm grateful for that. Or two, that if I do get it, that I'm going to have a better chance of getting over it and recovering from that because of that health and wellness. And again, that's, we have statistical evidence on that. But I see, we often see people who are pursuing health and wellness. If something happens, we try to discount them. And I don't think that makes sense. It doesn't pan out. Michael Robeson, he says, a desire for a better quality of life and longevity and self-esteem. And I said, quality of life, what specifics stand out for you? Michael says, mobility, strength, sleep, quality, endurance, and general feelings of well-being. As a personal trainer, I focus on helping others refine confidence and focus to get the heart level results, to see self-worth as they improve their health. Well, I don't know Michael. So I asked him, I said, gosh, as a trainer, what do you find are the most common motives for your clients? And he says, it's gaining confidence, feeling a sense of accomplishment and better health, which includes improvements in things like cholesterol and libido and overcoming diabetes and smaller sizes and more strength and more tone and physique, to name a few things. And I do see that. I have seen so many people go from poor levels of health and wellness and fitness and being overweight and whatever, and then become fitter and, weller. in that sense. And I would say, even if they're even outside of the literal physical biomarkers and measurements of health that they're going to realize with that, that what it does for their positive mindset is worth it in and of itself. And I see it so often. I've seen so many great stories. Like, maybe I should do a couple focused episodes and go through people's stories and see that in the pursuit of just losing weight, getting fit, whatever, however that looks specifically, as they do that, it's such a catalyst for other things in their life. And this is not my research. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a researcher. I haven't done this, but why is that? Why is it that we see that? Because I would say I have seen that as a bit better, bigger catalyst for people's overall life improvement than anything else. I've seen other people who have gained a big financial boost, and I have not seen it motivate and cause the positive ripple effect as much as somebody who gains health and wellness. I've seen people, have a great success relationally, find the love of their life. And I think anytime we find a big success, it creates ripple effects. But why is it that I've never seen historically, experientially, as many or as great a level of positive ripple effects in any with a boon happening in any area of life as much as I have in health and wellness? It's really interesting. Great testimonial to it there. Cindy says, we want to travel the USA and out of the country, and got to be in good health to do so. It's always good to have a motivator. It's one of the things that Dr. Randy James does with every patient, is start off with saying, what is your motive for being here? Well, I just want to be healthy. Well, why? I just I just want to, feel good and be able. Well, why? And it literally can kind of get ridiculous and come down to, because I feel ashamed that I can't go participate with my family, or because I feel I saw a relative who was very immobile, and I don't want to be like them. I remember a guy one time who said, I want to go see, he was a military guy. I want to go see I want to travel to DC and see the great military monuments one more time. He's actually in a wheelchair. What is that core motive? We've seen it with people who say, I got divorced and whatever. I want to find the love of my life, and I want to look a certain way. Whatever that motive is, what is it at the core is so good to know. So here's one where she's just got some activities she wants to do. Guy Williams, he says, it's the fear of future potential regret. Scares the heck out of me. That, I think, we're seeing a lot in our culture right now. David says, it makes me feel better in general about myself. I'm fortunate that I enjoy exercising. Stephen Cruson, he says, 2 reasons: watching my parents deal with dementia, and 2, having had a retinal detachment, as I'm not convinced that my detachment was due to bad luck. So he's a very healthy. I follow Steve and I follow each other on Strava. If you're not familiar with that, it's an app you can get. So I wear a Garmin watch. You can wear, there's a zillion watches out there. So I wear a Garmin because its strength is on GPS, like tracking your routes. So for me, riding, mountain biking, and running, trail running, are my favorite activities, exercise activities, and it tracks those. But it tracks a lot of stuff, but it connects to Strava, which is, think of it as social media for athletes, social platform, community for athletes. And you go on there and it'll post your performance, and it'll show other people. And that sounds like a bragging thing, and it's generally not. And I have fun with it, especially locally, because I see friends doing different routes around here and go, gosh, where was that? I didn't know about that trail. And it's also neat because at the end of the year, it gives you all your stats. And that was really neat to show me how many miles I rode, how many miles I ran, how much elevation I ran and rode. That was a neat one. That over the year, I did, 100,000 feet of elevation or something like that. And it shows you your heart rate and different health biomarkers again. Really neat. So I follow Stephen on there. Tamara says, my husband and my grandkids are my drive, my motive. Julia Hammond, multiple autoimmune issues. I've recently lost 30 pounds from switching to an almost all autoimmune protocol diet and lifting weights. I'm feeling pretty great and much stronger. I don't want to go back to how things were. So I'll keep working out and watching what I eat. Okay, I got an interesting one for you folks. Caleb Miller. That is my first child, my first biological child. He's not my oldest. I have an amazing adopted daughter who's, I think, about a year, maybe not quite that much older than Caleb, but he's my first child I ever experienced. I had a bunch of medical issues till the age of 12 almost, had epilepsy, and has an amazing story. So he says now he's now 25. I think maybe he just turned 26. And this past year moved to Florida, loving life there. He says, I exercise for many reasons: to increase my self-image and self-confidence, to increase my physical strength and mobility and health. And I do it because I just feel good afterwards. Somehow, after expending the energy from a hard workout, I feel more upbeat and energized and sharp. So it's a win-win every which way. I feel so much better on days I exercise than days that I don't. So I then had a discussion with him via text after that. I thanked him for posting that, and we got to talking about it. So here's a quick story for you. Caleb had spent a lot of his life in the medical community, in the hospital as a patient. He now works in a hospital helping. He's not a patient there, thank goodness. And so he is in an incredible hospital in Sarasota, Florida. It's a real famous one that I can't remember the name of at this moment, but he's in there and he's really struggling with the lack of health that he sees amongst his peers and fellow employees. Now, I know this through, I keep mentioning his name, Dr. Randy James, that statistically the healthcare community of providers. Now, when I say healthcare, I'm not talking about health and wellness. I'm talking about the medical community out there, which is the bulk of our healthcare, that is dealing with management of illness and disease. Okay. So our doctors, our nurses, and the zillion employees, or people, providers, let's call them, working within the medical community. And here in America, we spend more on that healthcare, in quotes, than we do anything else, period. No military, no nothing. We spend the most on healthcare, primarily dealing with illness and disease. Caleb's working in that right now. And here's what he says, and I'm going to try to keep this as politically correct and as compassionate as possible. But this is just interesting to see. This is a 26-year-old man, young man. And he says, you just heard his testimony on health and wellness. He says, I feel like a fish out of water at work when it comes to health and wellness. He says, I'm in the field of healthcare, which, as you know, is more accurately illness management. What's worse is everyone is now accepting and expecting decline starting at 30 years old. He keeps hearing this. Everyone at work will tell me and insist that I'm going to start hurting myself. So here he is. So he's really working out. He's put on a lot of muscle. So he's 26 years old, and they're saying he's going to hurt himself, get aches and pains, and have issues as soon as he hits 30. No matter how much I tell them, it doesn't have to be that way and shouldn't be that way. When did that expected age get all the way down to 30? It's asinine. I should still have 2/3 of a strong, healthy, flourishing life ahead of me at that point, maybe even more. But everyone around me is completely blind and in denial of that being even remotely something to consider. It aggravates me and it infuriates me and just makes me sad. But I'm grateful for the awareness of true life. And I have the joy of living and striving towards. And it's interesting. And I do want to say this, and gosh, it's not, I am privileged to be aware of health and wellness. I didn't earn the exposure that I got to have to health and wellness and this. So it's nothing that I can claim. It was handed to me on a silver platter. And it was to Caleb as well. Even through his medical stuff, he got to see that, but his example, and I'm grateful that this is something I was able to inspire my kids. And again, folks, I want to say this with humility. We're going to come into, this is, what drives you to health and wellness, physically, mentally. We're going to get into other spokes, and I'm going to mention finances because that's always been an Achilles heel for me. I did not give my son or my kids great examples financially. Dave Ramsey did. I did not. Okay. So with that said, I did give them, and my wife has as well, a good example from a physical health and wellness. And he's seen that. Here he is at 26, and people are telling him he's going to have aches and pains and hurts at the age of 30. Well, I'm his dad. I'm 50. And last week, 2 weeks ago, did a duathlon. It was a 6 mile run and I think a 14 mile mountain bike ride. I'm doing more exercise today than arguably, I'd have to think back close to it. I'm doing more now than I have in the past 2 decades since I quit being a professional cyclist. And I'm competing. I'm looking at a triathlon again. I'm going to do some other races, and I don't have any aches and pains. I have I have not an Achilles heel. I have some plantar fasciitis from some overrunning that I'm dealing with, but that's to me a good pain. And I'm getting past it, and I am running and riding at a huge degree. And so he sees that. And of course, I'm inspired by people who are 80 or 90 and are still doing it. I don't have the details pulled up, but if you look at the world record for the plank, it's a guy, and I think he's 62, who it's just, ridiculous. You're going to look at him and discount him and say, yeah, that's just some guy. He's always been fit and he probably devotes all his life to it. He doesn't. But the thing I want to point out too, there's also another lady. She's an African-American lady. Not that I need to differentiate for that, but for you to recognize her if you go search for it. And she is a weightlifter. Man, she's like 82, 83, 85, something like that. And it's impressive. I think she has a Guinness record for something. And that's why I've seen her in a lot of the media in the past years. But both of these people, 62-year-old plank guy who planked for like 9 hours. I can't even do a minute hardly. And this older lady, bodybuilder. What gets me though is their mental capacity. So that's really cool. They can do that physically, but do you also notice that they're just sitting there talking to you with the same mental clarity that you would expect from a 26-year-old like my son? That's powerful. And hear the things that they're doing in their lives otherwise with their families and in their work and in their endeavors. That to me is a bigger motivator than being able to do a plank for 9 hours, which I don't know what application to life that has other than it's an inspiration, I guess, to folks. Okay, here's a few more. Kate Hansen, she says, what drives me is the beauty of being outdoors and the feeling I get when I push myself. Lori, she says, it sounds vain, but it's how I look. Knowing that if I eat burgers every day, it's going to start to show. And Debbie, right after this, Debbie Turner says, nothing tastes as good as skinny feels. I hate losing weight also, so I watch carefully not to gain any. That aspect of vanity came up a few times. I'm not going to read all the comments, but as Lori there says, it sounds vain. I think that's disappointing that we think of that there is a joy. I mean, people so often, how many people come out and see their new car and they just feel good about it, or they drive up to their house with flowers and a nicely mowed yard and nice paint. And that, man, it makes them feel good, or, whatever that thing is that they take pride in or makes them feel good. Man, I don't discount that. How about looking in the mirror and just saying, man, I just feel good about how I look? Is that vain? Now, obviously it can be, and we're in a culture with Instagram and all the social, all the social platforms where we see a lot of vanity and we discount that. But then I also know that, man, it makes us feel good to like the vision of who we see in the mirror. Man, I'm grateful for that. If that's vanity, I think there's aspects of vanity that are healthy. Renee Bosworth Schultz, she says, overall, it's a sense of well-being. It improves my mental awareness and my state of mind, mental, physical, spiritual, emotional, financial, everything. Laura Rayburn, she says, lots of reasons. Now I know Laura is I don't know if she calls herself an ultra runner, but she is a runner. Number one, she says, because I love being outdoors, especially on trails. It fills and fulfills me in ways that other activities don't. I also follow her on the Strava app, where we follow each other. It's really inspirational to see all that she's doing. And she does a lot with her kids now. She's number two, because I invariably feel better and have more energy when I exercise and eat well. Number three, because I like who I am when I do those things. Four, it's because they help me attain bigger goals like difficult races and stretch what I believe I'm capable of. Man, I see that with a lot of people, especially those who do events and really push themselves, is it shows their capacity and helps them deal well and have success in other areas of their lives. I do like her number three, they're saying, because I like who I am when I do those things. That's where I think the sum of the benefit is greater than in and of itself, that who she is because she did a 10-mile race or whatever. The fact that she did a 10-mile race, that's great, but it's how she feels about herself overall that matters even more. The fact that she showcased discipline, that she showcased perseverance, that she pushed through is more important than actually having whatever she did in that specific race. Patty Gale says it's quality of life now when I'm in my 80s and beyond. And as I've heard you say more than once, Kevin, it's the race to stay out of the nursing home. That's one of the things that Dr. James, that Randy asks patients. He says, what's your goal? Is your goal to slide into a nursing home pretty soon? Or is it to do the Olympics? And of course, both of them are polarized opposites, but it helps people. Generally, what it does is cause them to realize that they have no goal. They haven't thought about it. And I really like looking at performance and symptoms, meaning, do you have a goal? How do you want to function? What is your goal? Do you want to be able to touch your toes, to be able to walk up a flight of stairs without aches and pains and breathing heavy? Do you want to be in the Olympics? Or what is the goal? What do you want the capacity to do? Do you want to be able to get down on the floor with your grandkids? What is that goal? And also then, what symptoms are you okay with? Are you okay with frequent headaches and migraines? Are you okay with the aches and pains? Are you okay with the discomfort or whatever? And a lot of times we just take it as a norm and don't really take it captive. And again, as I started out with, come into agreement with what we actually want. What is driving us, good and bad? Kalen here, he says, I agree with Lori Vane. The way I look determines so many facets of my life. My general attitude can be affected if I'm packing on fat, not to mention my confidence, which enables me to do my job. Now, I said I was going to share a story, and I'll do that real quick here. Maya Shunker, first name is Maya, last name Shankar. So I had her just recently here on the What Drives You podcast. She has a new, really big podcast called A Slight Change of Plans that you can find out there. And she had on the show a girl whose name I can't remember at the moment, but it's a girl who lost a bunch of weight. It's like 100 pounds. Maybe it was more than that. And she actually shared some disappointment in that how disappointment in that people treated her better. People gave her privileges. And she started feeling like she had to act up according to that and felt like she wasn't being herself. And that was interesting. And I'm not sharing that as a motive to not lose weight and to be overweight, because being overweight, regardless of how you feel, is factually a deterrent, a detriment to your health. So even if you're happy that way or whatever, we also know that you're a bigger risk. You're a bigger risk of illness and disease. That I think I can say that's just factual. But it is interesting, and we can look at that and being a disappointment that we as a culture give. Oh my gosh, we know that with men are given more privilege, taller men and people in general. If you're taller, you're given more privilege. If you look a certain way, you're given more privilege. And we can say that's disappointing, that we give more privilege to somebody who is fit and trim as opposed to somebody who's overweight. That is a disappointing reality of humanity. And yet it's something that we all participate in. You're going to treat me differently if I pull up in your house in a $50,000 car than if I pull up at your house in my 1999 beat up gold Chevrolet Suburban that I haul trash and bikes and stuff in, that I often drive into work. We make judgments upon what we see. We do judge a book by its cover, and we can say that's unfortunate. And we can also say it is. And so you decide, what you want to deal with, what you want to benefit from. But that's, I appreciate Kaylin bringing that out. And now again, I think it's unfortunate also that we call that vanity. Savannah says it's self-confidence and personal body image. Christy Miller's longevity. Kevin Helm, he says, it's my way of being different. And that is, especially again, I'm going to pick on America. If you are going to be healthy and well and do the things to foster that, exercise, eat differently than the normal American fare, you are going to stand out. You are going to be weird, and it will cause some discomfort. That's part of that. We talked about that in an episode of the True Life show, that is going to cause some discomfort. You will be weird. You have to choose to be weird. Same way I appreciate Dave Ramsey saying that with financial peace. You have to live like nobody else so you can live like nobody else. And you will have to be weird and not having debt and not spending freely, not buying frivolously, at least initially, till you get to a point of financial stability. Micah Atwater, he says, partly because of dementia and Alzheimer's on both sides of the family, but probably more so because I don't want to be discontent or embarrassed about my body all my life. That is one, again, that we can look at that and say it's unfortunate, but I have generally experienced in my lifetime and seen in the culture that when we don't look a certain way, when we do look out of shape, when we are overweight, it's rarely not associated with a level of guilt. And for that matter, it's a reason to motivate, even my kids gosh, there's lots of things that I don't want them, hardships to endure if they don't have to. And that is one, because when I so often, especially these days, I'll see younger and younger kids who are obese, and I can see the embarrassment. I can see how they pull at their clothes. I can see how they're not comfortable in their bodies. And you might say, well, the bummer is that they don't feel comfortable feeling comfortable looking that way. Man, I'm with you. And I can't change how it is out there. And they're comparing themselves to their friends on Instagram with, the beautiful people and whatnot. We just can't get rid of it. So I'm grateful for for anybody who's not overweight to just not have to deal with that piece of guilt. No different than the guilt that you would feel if you have to drive a jalopy, just like I was talking about, and you feel embarrassed about that. It's just a reality of life. Amy Van Slambrook, I feel like it's my responsibility to care for the body God gave me, and I want my fitness and health to be an extraordinary level, at an extraordinary level, to reflect the extraordinary creator inside of me. Run the race, as the verse says. And it's also my gift to my future husband and those who love me. Aging in reverse is my goal in order to accomplish the vision I have for my life. This is not politically correct, I'm sure. I grew up in the church. I grew up in the Bible Belt of the South, and it is not a bastion of health. And it's sad to me today that when we look at the church and a place that is professing to be the light of God and pointing to supposedly to a better life, a more fulfilling life, and I would put in there a healthier life, that from a health and wellness standpoint, it is not a demographic of health and wellness. And we do a lot of time praying for people's, here's how my buddy Randy put it. He says, when we have somebody in the church who's struggling financially, we may help them out, but at some point we may also say, hey, here's a Dave Ramsey class. Let's help get you educated and see if we can give you some tangible help to getting your finances better. And yet we'll pray forever for somebody's health and wellness, and yet not help them learn some of the basic tenets of being healthy and well. And so we talk about stewardship of our spirit, of our relationships, of our finances. We don't often in our culture, and specifically in the church, talk about stewardship of our bodies and our mental health, which we're seeing in America is at a radically increasing detriment. It's not a good sight. So Amy, I appreciate what you said. Thanks to all the people who did respond here. I hope that in reading these responses, we covered a lot and it gave you some inspiration for your motivation. Why do you want to be at the level of health and wellness you are? What level of health and wellness do you want to be? What's the drive? What's the motive? Are you in agreement with it? If you look now and wonder, why are you at the place now? Something drove you there. There is a reason that drove you there, and it's positive and negative, but there may be some, if you're in a negative place of health and wellness, chances are there's some negative drives that are keeping you from pursuing health and wellness, or that are causing you to feed unhealthy appetites. which, appetites is the name of the game. We all have them. We all feed them. We are going to feed our appetites. We're not going to kill our appetites. The opportunity is to upgrade and elevate those appetites to less detrimental ones. Folks, I hope this was a benefit and that it was a motivator. I probably brought up some hard feelings in some folks as well, but here's a key area of life, our health and wellness, that causes fulfillment, and knowing what drives us, being in agreement with it. That's alignment. That's where we will get a healthy drive to help us get to the place that we do want to be in our health and wellness. Thanks for tuning in to the What Drives You podcast. Till the next time, I hope you stay driven.